It's spooky season here at Cultaholic, and what better way to celebrate than with a ranking list of one of WWE's scariest match types. We've seen various sinister stips in WWE over the years, the Buried Alive match, the Inferno match, and the spookiest of all, the 60-minute Iron Man match. Who doesn't get a sense of dread when one of those bad boys crops up on a pay-per-view card? But in this video, we're going to take a look at the classic scary stipulation, the casket match. If you're new to wrestling, it's pretty simple. To win the bout, you have to put your opponent in a casket and close the lid. Pure wrestling at its finest, just like the ancient Greeks intended. There have been 20 televised casket matches in WWE, and we'll just be honest about this, most of them feature The Undertaker. This is going to be an Undertaker-heavy list. But the dead man isn't the only important figure here. All manner of superstars have competed in casket matches over the years, including some of WWE's most colourful figures, from Heidenreich to Heidenreich. So without any further ado, it's time to separate the wheat from the chaff. Or should I say the wheat from the casket match. I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic.com, and this is every WWE casket match ranked from worst to best. Join us. Number 20, Undertaker vs Yokozuna. As we all know, wrestling has a very fluid relationship with realism. Sometimes wrestling is a hairy heel tag team methodically breaking down their opponents, and that's great. Sometimes wrestling is a bald man from Texas pouring cement into his boss's Corvette, and that's great as well. But sometimes the scale breaks entirely, and wrestling becomes so ludicrous, even its own fans struggle to accept what's going on. That's exactly what happened at the 1994 Royal Rumble, where we find the worst casket match on our list. Undertaker squared off against WWF champion Yokozuna, who called upon a huge army of heel helpers like a massive 90s Shane McMahon. His group included Diesel, Bam Bam Bigelow, Crush, Jeff Jarrett, and both head shrinkers. Good luck, Taker. This was more of an angle than a match, and not a good angle either. But the worst was yet to come. After Taker was stuffed into the casket, smoke billowed out from the inside. Then he appeared on the Tron and cut a promo from inside the casket, and then his spirit rose from the Tron and he went up to heaven. I'm not making this up, I promise. Then Scott Steiner came out because he was the #1 entrant in the Rumble, and the show must go on. Never mind that we'd just seen confirmation of the afterlife, we also needed to find out who was going to WrestleMania. Number 19, Undertaker vs Kane. The no contest rule is a useful one in wrestling. It can be used to convey a sense of unplanned danger or chaos, but it's also a double-edged sword. There are certain stipulations that simply shouldn't end in a no contest, and the casket match is one of them. Others include Buried Alive, TLC, and can't think of a third one. As far as we can tell, this is the only non-finish to a televised casket match in WWE history, with Kane simply following Taker and Paul Bearer to the back. Even if the match had ended properly, it still wouldn't have been that impressive. It only lasted a few minutes, and for whatever reason, Kane and Undertaker have never had the best in-ring chemistry. This is also the only match on our list where the casket sustained a lot of damage before the final bell. Maybe that's why they never bothered having a proper finish. Who knows? Number 18, Triple H vs VISCERA and MIDEON. This was actually part of a larger series of 5 stipulation matches, all of which took place on the last SmackDown before Unforgiven 1999. To secure a shot at the vacant WWF Championship, the game would have to win 3 of the 5 contests. This led to Triple H absolutely dominating the episode, as he was featured in over half of the total action on the show. In other words, it was just another day at the office for Big Hunter. Let's run through the series of matches. First, Triple H lost to Big Show in a chokeslam challenge match. Next up was an Inferno match against Kane, which the game won because Kane's really bad at not getting set on fire. Our casket match was next and lasted just a couple of minutes. Triple H was supposed to take on Undertaker, but he walked out and was replaced by VISCERA and MIDEON. Despite being the Ministry members usually left in Bill's PC, they actually managed to win the damn thing. Midway through the match, Shane McMahon informed Triple H that he would have to fit both of his opponents into the casket. Unable to bend the laws of physics to his will, he lost the bout, which is quite understandable, really. But he was able to win the series overall, beating Mankind in a Boiler Room Brawl and The Rock in a, wait for it, a Brahma Bull Rope match. Number 17, Undertaker vs Rusev. For reasons never really made clear, this match had a very uncertain build. Originally, Undertaker was set to take on Rusev, and then his opponent suddenly became Chris Jericho. Everybody wanted answers, so Lana went on Twitter and said that she'd complained to WWE officials about her husband competing in a casket match. And everybody said, "No, Lana, we don't want kayfabe answers, we want real ones." Then suddenly, Rusev was Undertaker's opponent again, with Jericho now an entrant in the Greatest Royal Rumble. One day there'll be a Netflix series about the build to this bout, and we cannot wait. Unfortunately, the backstage intrigue was far more entertaining than the match itself. It was pretty much a slow beatdown, with Rusev getting little offense in of his own. Aiden English tried to interfere, but ate a chokeslam and tombstone for his troubles. Without much trouble at all, Taker managed to get both of them in the casket, close the lid, and pick up the win. All that was left to do was go out and paint the town red. The sad truth is that despite being a very basic and underwhelming contest, this remains Undertaker's best match in Saudi Arabia. Not that it has much competition. Number 16, Undertaker vs Vader. Imagine you're the head booker of the WWF in 1997. You've booked Undertaker to be in the main event of WrestleMania 13, where the plan is for him to beat Sid and win the championship. 1 week before the event, Taker's also scheduled to face Vader in a casket match on an MSG Network special. Who do you book to win? Who do you book to win? The right answer is to have Undertaker go over, keeping him strong for Mania, right? Yes, you are right. That absolutely is the correct answer. But for whatever reason, the decision was made to have him lose the match just 1 week before his big moment of glory. Okay, so he didn't lose clean. Mankind emerged from the casket to immobilize the Phenom with the mandible claw before rolling his limp body in and slamming the lid shut. Taker got his heat back after the match, but it still made for an incredibly confusing booking decision. Even more strangely, the finish was exactly the same as the one we'd seen less than a year earlier. And as luck would have it, we're about to discuss that match right now. Number 15, Undertaker vs Goldust. Yes, Undertaker lost this one too, again via Mankind interference. You'd think that the Phenom would start checking the casket before the match for any potential enemies. It's a trick he's pulled on enough opponents himself over the years. Unlike Taker vs Vader, this one at least lasted a decent amount of time, and it took place on an actual pay-per-view. On the downside, there were a few little miscommunications here. Neither Taker nor Goldust appeared to be on their A-game, although the match was still generally okay. It was also quite strange to see the mandible claw take Undertaker down so quickly. Maybe Foley should have remembered this tactic a couple of years later at King of the Ring. It might have prevented the most terrifying bump in wrestling history. I'm talking, of course, about Terry Funk being chokeslammed and his shoes flying off. Number 14, Triple H vs Kane. This one came in the midst of the Katie Vick feud. Oh, wonderful. Everybody remembers the awful skit where Triple H dressed as Kane and pretended to... you know. We've all seen it, I don't need to spell it out for you. This match came 1 week afterwards and was set up by a pretty tasteless opening segment involving a Katie Vick mannequin. Triple H even did a bit of amateur ventriloquism, fair play to him for expanding his skill set. By this stage, the match was deeply personal. They brawled at the bell and things developed into a nice back and forth contest. The deciding factor, however, wasn't Kane's rage or the cerebral assassin's cerebralness, it was actually Shawn Michaels, who popped out of the casket dressed like your mum at a golf tournament. He blasted Triple H with a sweet chin music, Kane hit a chokeslam, and the game was rolled into the casket for a lovely babyface victory. Then Michaels danced on top of the casket to his theme music, which sounds like quite strange behavior for any other wrestler, but just sort of makes sense when it's HBK. Number 13, Undertaker vs Big Show. This is one of quite a few examples where the story of the match goes like this. Undertaker's opponent really does not want to have a casket match with The Undertaker. Big Show's strategy here wasn't to win, but simply to get the match called off. It might have worked against any other opponent, but let's not forget that Taker is a giant zombie wizard with supernatural abilities and an army of loyal druids at his disposal. So when Big Show tried to do what you or I would and simply walk out of the arena, his exit was blocked by flames shooting up from the entranceway. Instead, he tried to destroy the casket itself, because no casket, no match. match. It was a clever plan, but one that was foiled when the Druids simply brought out another one. Well done to Undertaker for being prepared. This bout actually had one of the most unique finishes of any casket match. The pair battled up to the stage, where Taker whipped Big Show into the casket, which was stood vertically. That is what innovation looks like, ladies and gentlemen. Credit also to Big Show for managing to charge into the casket, topple it over, and have the lid slam shut on top of him. Did it go off without a hitch? Yes. Did it also make the finish slightly unintentionally funny? Let's go to the next match. Number 12, Daniel Bryan versus Kane. Corporate Kane, hooray! In a backstage promo earlier in the show, Kane seemed to imply that if Bryan lost the match, he would stay in the casket forever and actually die. Did nobody tell him that they let the loser out shortly afterwards? The bout itself was nothing amazing, but it was a solid contest between two wrestlers who know each other inside out. Bryan had the crowd behind him, of course, and even though there wasn't much of a big match feel, they did a decent job of making it feel important. One drawback may have been timing. This match came the week after the infamous 2015 Royal Rumble, which saw the crowd revolt when Bryan was eliminated after just a 10-minute stint. Given that the year before he'd forced his way into the main event of WrestleMania under similar circumstances, you can understand why another Kane feud wasn't the most inspiring direction. Bryan won, by the way, escaping an eternity locked inside the casket, if you follow Kane's definition of the rules. The big red machine really missed the memo there, didn't he? Number 11, Undertaker versus The Rock. This one may be a little high on our list given its short length and lack of actual wrestling, but it was charged with the unmistakable energy of the Attitude Era. The match also provided an iconic moment for GIF users across the internet wrestling world, but funnily enough, it didn't even involve the casket itself. In a moment I'm sure you've seen replayed in all its grainy, gifable glory, Rock set Undertaker up for a people's elbow, only for the Phenom to sit up in the middle of his long 2K animation. Panicking for just a second, the Brahma Bull simply kicked Undertaker back into place before finishing the move. Sometimes wrestling is fun. The most important factor in this match wasn't even the men officially involved. Triple H and Shane McMahon ran down to interfere in a lovely example of brother-in-law bonding. Although, to be fair, Triple H didn't marry Stephanie until later that year, or 2003 if we're only counting shoot weddings. The game whacked Rock's already injured arm with a sledgehammer, allowing Undertaker to win the match on behalf of everybody's favourite stable, the Corporate Ministry. Those wacky scamps. Number 10, Undertaker versus Chavo Guerrero. It's probably fair to say that this is one of the more forgotten casket matches. Chavo Guerrero is great at being an adorable lucha heel and part-time golfy man, but casket matches don't seem to be his forte. The good news, however, is that this match was pretty good. It certainly benefited from being different. In Undertaker's casket matches, the dead man is usually paired up against someone with a similar size or spooky factor. Chavo made for a unique opponent, and the bout stood out as a result. To be honest though, this was just a warm-up for Taker's upcoming pay-per-view casket match against the Big Show. And yes, as you may have noticed, this one ranks higher. Classic Chavo, always stealing the show. Big Show ended up involving himself in the match, but ran away after taking a bump on the casket itself because he's scared of them. I can't imagine why. Taker was able to pick up the win from there, polishing off Chavo in just over 7 minutes. Lovely. Number 9, Undertaker versus Mark Henry. This match came on a WrestleMania Rewind edition of Raw, which featured a handful of rematches from past Manias. As well as the casket match, a redo of WrestleMania 22, we also had Triple H versus Kane from Mania 15, and John Cena versus Shawn Michaels from Mania 23. Now obviously, as we all know, they're the 3 greatest WrestleMania matches of all time. Take a seat, Austin and Brett. Therefore, Taker and Mark Henry had some big shoes to fill. Their own shoes, but you start to shrink when you get older, don't you? Could they live up to their WrestleMania encounter? In a word, no, as we'll see shortly. But they certainly gave it a good attempt. Henry adopted an old school strategy, taking out Undertaker with slams and splashes. I have to give credit to the world's strongest man here, digging into the playbook of previous Taker opponents such as Yokozuna and KAMALA. But the dead man responded by going new school, catching Henry in the Hell's Gate, choking him unconscious, and rolling his body into the casket with little trouble. Number 8, Undertaker vs Kama. We've mocked a few matches on this list for being too cartoonish. Just a quick reminder, Undertaker once responded to a loss by literally ascending to heaven. Most wrestlers just turn heel or change their attire or something. But the problem with Undertaker vs Kama is that it wasn't cartoonish enough. The pair wrestled a long, ultra-serious contest in line with the idea of Kama as a legitimate shoot fighter. In fairness, the drawn-out, brawling nature of the match did give us one unique moment. At one stage, both wrestlers stood face-to-face in the casket itself, exchanging blow after blow, an imaginative spot at the time. Although we've not been too enthusiastic about the more serious nature of this match, we have to admit that it represented a necessary step in the stipulation's development. Despite being only the 4th televised casket match, it already ran the risk of seeming outdated as the larger-than-life Hulkamania era faded further into the past. Forced to ditch the spooky gimmicks, Undertaker instead had to focus on the wearing down of a dangerous opponent. It remains a grueling watch, but a necessary change too. Number 7, Undertaker vs King Mabel. This match looked a little bit different to other casket matches for a couple of reasons. First of all, the casket was brought to ringside by Mabel's entourage, and those naughty chaps had graffitied all over it. Secondly, Undertaker wrestled this match in a Phantom of the Opera style mask. This wasn't because he felt particularly fabulous when he woke up that morning, it's actually because Mabel had legitimately fractured his orbital bone in a previous encounter, courtesy of a wayward leg drop. In fact, Mabel found himself in the doghouse backstage as a result and had been branded as an unsafe worker. Hopefully this bout restored some faith in the big man as he and Undertaker put on a pretty entertaining contest. It was a little bit short and not very inventive, but it certainly got the job done. This was a pure feel-good babyface victory, with the Phenom taking out both Mabel and an interfering Mo, before tossing both into the casket to secure victory. Of course, both Taker and Mabel would later become ministry buddies, and as Viscera, Mabel would help beat Triple H in that casket match we talked about near the start of this video. Everything comes full circle. In fact, maybe all of WWE's booking decisions are storytelling masterstrokes. It just takes years and years to tie up all the loose ends. Let's go with that. Number 6, Undertaker vs Heidenreich. This match seems to have a bad reputation, perhaps because Heidenreich wasn't the most technically proficient wrestler WWE has ever seen. But for all his drawbacks, we think the bleach blonde heel did a good job here, really selling his fear of the stipulation in a way few successfully have. Occasionally, this fear became anger, just like Yoda warned us. When Heidenreich wasn't trying to run away from the match, he was genuinely getting the better of the dead man, at one stage rolling the casket down the ramp and crushing Taker against the ring. Despite being the bigger name by far, Undertaker bumped all over the place for Heidenreich. This is perhaps because the pair were apparently booked for a rematch at WrestleMania a few months down the line. Ultimately, that never happened, but this match still had a number of big spots, the biggest being Undertaker's leg drop from the apron to the casket, with Heidenreich's body wedged halfway inside. We also saw interference from Snitsky, which was absolutely outrageous, by the way, because he was a Raw superstar at the time. It's brand warfare! I love it, MABEL! Thankfully, Kane was on hand to even the odds, popping out of the casket and allowing Undertaker to eventually win the match. By the way, they were on the same side this time. We know it's hard to keep track. Number 5, Undertaker vs KAMALA. Here we go, the first televised casket match in WWE history. And yes, it was quite messy. Undertaker and KAMALA spent a lot of the bout slowly brawling back and forth, but in terms of selling this new match type, they did a fantastic job. So did Paul Bearer on the outside, who really excelled in adding to the bout's sinister atmosphere. It may look a little bit silly through modern eyes, but the crowd were clearly enthralled by the pageantry of the stipulation. KAMALA did an excellent job selling his fear, often too afraid to even stand and fight with Undertaker given the consequences. The original casket design may have also helped. The build to this match saw Undertaker personally construct the container, and you can sort of believe that thanks to its sinister and minimalistic design. He doesn't have time to add any bells and whistles, he's got a match to prepare for. For a while, it actually seemed as though KAMALA was going to win this one, as he kept the Phenom grounded with splash after splash after splash after splash. There were a lot of splashes here. In the end though, it was Undertaker who picked up the victory before hammering a few nails into the casket lid for good measure. He was the babyface, it's fine. Number 4, Undertaker vs Mark Henry. We've talked about the rematch on Monday Night Raw, now it's time to go back to where it all began. This bout was unique for a number of reasons. It's the only casket match to take place at WrestleMania so far, and therefore the only casket match of Undertaker's undefeated streak. Although not on the same level as Taker's legendary bouts with the likes of Michaels, Edge, or CM Punk, it was still an enjoyable affair. I hope we're not being too controversial in saying that it was even better than the one against Giant Gonzalez. There were several impressive moments here, and unfortunately for the world's strongest man, he was on the receiving end of most of them. At one stage, Taker hit a huge dive, flying over the casket itself to find his target. He even hit a last ride on his massive opponent, because when it's WrestleMania, Taker wrestles like he's collected a star in Super Mario. With this victory, the dead man's streak moved to 14-0. We used Wikipedia's page on the streak to make sure that this was correct, and I just want to highlight their entire summary of the match, which reads, "The Undertaker won the casket match when he put Mark Henry inside the casket." Captivating stuff. Number 3, Undertaker versus Yokozuna. Taker's Royal Rumble casket match with Yokozuna may have ranked bottom of our list, but their rematch at Survivor Series was a vast improvement. This is mainly due to the fact that only 4 heels tried to interfere this time, rather than the entire platoon that ran in at the beginning of the year. First, Bam Bam Bigelow and King Kong Bundy tried to make their presence felt, but Undertaker had an equalizer up his sleeve. If you've never seen this match, you're probably not going to believe us, but special guest enforcer Chuck Norris was on hand to stop them on the ramp. But Bundy and Bam Bam were just a distraction, allowing IRS to come through the crowd and choke Taker out in the ring. I'm no expert, but maybe the heels should have used IRS as the distraction and had the 2 big lads attack from behind, but that's just me. Regardless, Taker was able to mount a comeback and take control of the match. With Yokozuna on the brink of defeat, Jeff Jarrett became the 4th man to interfere, only for Chuck Norris to take him out with a big flamboyant heel kick. You don't mess with Walker Texas Ranger, or he'll Texas Ranger all over your ass. By the way, nobody here at Cultaholic has ever seen Walker Texas Ranger. Sorry. Number 2, Undertaker versus Randy Orton and Bob Orton. In case we have to spell it out for you, this match did not take place at WrestleMania 1. Bob Orton was not in his prime here. However, his son was on one of the hottest streaks of his career around this time. And despite Orton Sr. making this bout a little clunkier than it could have been in terms of psychology and character work, it's one of the best casket matches of all time. The father and son duo did an excellent job selling Taker's intimidation factor, while also taking every opportunity to use the numbers game to their advantage. One drawback, however, would be the announce team's confusion over the rules. At one stage, Undertaker managed to get Cowboy Bob into the casket, and it was implied on commentary that he would have to stay there until the end of the match. We hope he had a Game Boy with him to pass the time. Actually, it turns out he had a fire extinguisher. He burst from the casket and blinded Taker with the foam, allowing young Randall to hit an RKO and a sickening chair shot en route to victory. The pair then celebrated by covering the casket in petrol and setting it on fire, which has to be considered poor sportsmanship, to be honest. Number 1, Undertaker versus Shawn Michaels. This must be considered the greatest casket match of all time, and by quite a margin as well. Even looking back today, it remains leaps and bounds ahead of its competition. Of course, it has the benefit of featuring 2 of the greatest superstars of all time, who also just happen to share an incredible chemistry with one another. Unfortunately, the most memorable moment in this bout is probably Shawn Michaels' back injury, an incident which would eventually cost him several years of his career. What's less remembered, however, is that the injury occurred pretty early on, and that HBK battled his way through a match involving some very risky moments. The most spectacular of these was probably Shawn's leap from the top rope onto Taker, who was lying in the casket on the outside. He also decided to give his opponent a huge pile driver on the ring steps, but would get his comeuppance in the form of a tombstone into the casket later on. As well as being a great contest in terms of action, this match also featured a dramatic swerve towards the end. Kane had seemingly aligned with his brother in the build-up to this event, but it was a ruse all along. Towards the end of the match, he attacked Undertaker, aligned with D-Generation X, and helped Michaels to victory. He even set the casket on fire afterwards, but when they opened it, the Undertaker was gone. He came back a few months later to beat Kane at WrestleMania. It was all okay in the end.
Thanks for watching. Let us know what you think in the comments down below. You can follow us on Twitter at Cultaholic. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cultaholic. If you enjoy what we do here at Cultaholic, you can pledge to us on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Cultaholic. And most importantly, don't forget to hit subscribe and join us.